Samus Returns, did she ever leave? Yes, she did. For 14 years, she moseyed on out of our lives. Sure, we'd see her every now and again on the news, like we'd hear teasers, we'd hear rumors, sometimes we'd even see some illustrations of her we really wish we hadn't, but in the end, she never really paid us a visit. She never called, she never left a voicemail, she didn't even give us any money. Now, she's back and trying to have a better relationship with us after those fateful 14 years. She's not the best parent in the world, but at least the game... That's what we're talking about today.
Metroid is a series, I'll be honest, I never got the chance to fall in love with as a kid. The Prime Trilogy freaked the hell out of me by just looking at the back of the box. But again, this is coming from the same kid who was terrified by Luigi's Mansion for years, and maybe still is. As I've grown up, I've also grown to have a deep, girthy appreciation for the series, which, I mean, was kinda more peaked after my friends and I spent hours taking pictures of Zero Suit Samus in Brawl when she got that metal power-up. Yeah, no wonder I was bullied as a kid growing up. That and Luigi's Mansion, that's a hard combo to have. However, when I was trying to make up for the lost Metroid time, I stuck to the best ones, you know, the more mainstream titles like Super Metroid, the Prime Trilogy, Metroid Fusion, and Metroid Zero Mission, only dabbling a little bit with Other M. One of the few I never touched was Metroid 2 Return of Samus for the Game Boy, and just looking at this gameplay, I think you might understand why I was a little turned off by it at first. Visually, it looks super dated, and from what I read and heard from my pals, this was a game not meant for newcomers to the series, but rather more hardcore fans wanting to get a blast from the past. But what I think Metroid 2 might lack in quality, it otherwise excels in cultural meaning. See, Metroid 2 was important to progressing the Metroid brand, as it was the sequel to the first NES title and the predecessor to Super Metroid, establishing a lot of the same gameplay elements Super would later expand upon to make it into the critically acclaimed installment we know it for today. But unlike the first Metroid on NES, Metroid 2 was never treated to a reimagining like with Metroid Zero Mission, which was always a shame considering how dated the game was and how much could be expanded upon itself. That's where Milton Guasti, otherwise known as Dr. M64, came in. He sought to recreate Metroid 2 in a similar manner that Metroid Zero Mission had done for the original. This project, later called Another Metroid 2 Remake, or AM2R for short, took the team 10 years to put together, ultimately culminating into a fleshed-out, completed game in the summer of 2016, only for Nintendo to immediately hit it with a DMCA copyright claim. To make this tale a little less sad and a cool turn of events, the creator of AM2R was recently hired by Moon Studios to help with designing levels for Ori and the Will of Wisps, and since Ori and the Blind Forest is my favorite game of all time, I know he's gonna do a great job. I'm looking forward to playing it. However, in the same tide of recent events, Nintendo announced their very own Metroid 2 remake, aptly titled Metroid: Samus Returns, or should it itself be called Another Metroid 2 Remake, since, you know, it is another one after AM2R. This is why a lot of people think Nintendo originally took down AM2R, as a way to eliminate the potential competition of a good Metroid 2 remake that would pose to their very own. However, that doesn't mean we should boycott Metroid Samus Returns or anything like that. Remembering their past doesn't mean we have to punish them today. Dr. M64 and team specifically don't want that, and if they're fine with it, I am too. This is why I want to get this copyright fiasco out of the way so it doesn't clog up the rest of the video with a legal debate I already made a video about. That doesn't mean I won't be comparing all three variations of Metroid 2 today, because although AM2R is a fan game, it has enough value as a piece of media that it warrants its status as an important part in Metroid culture. To put it as my friend EPG did, AM2R is too special to ignore in this conversation. I want to get to the bottom of a central question I had as a casual fan of Metroid. What is the best way to play Metroid 2? What game delivers the best experience with those ideas and level design? Rather than comparing the three Metroid 2s part by part, let's look at them all individually to see how they hold up to each other. Metroid 2 Samus Returns for the Game Boy was first published in 1991 to decent critical reception and fairly good sales. The story is fairly straightforward, only being discussed in the game game's manual. A few years earlier, the bounty hunter Samus Aran had thwarted the space pirates' plot to use Metroids as a biological weapon to destroy all those that would stand in their way. Metroids are parasitic life forms that can suck up a creature's energy for their very own evolutionary processes, so evidently, the Galactic Federation wanted them eliminated from the galaxy so nobody could possibly use them as bioweapons again. The GF, learning about the existence of new Metroids, sent out teams in an attempt to terminate the Metroid species on SR388, but the teams were never heard from again. Desperate, they contracted bounty hunter Samus Aran to complete the dirty work. Samus ends up encountering a bunch of new Metroid mutations, discovering that the jellyfish-like stage is just their first form, and that the Metroid can evolve into even more terrifying beasts. She ends up murdering all these Metroids, including the Queen Metroid, until she comes upon a hatching egg where a baby Metroid emerges and mistakes Samus for its mother. Feeling sympathy, she refuses to exterminate the last of the Metroids, and the two board her gunship, setting up the events of Super Metroid. This narrative is pretty simple, and it isn't something I ended up loving or hating. It's there for fans who want to delve deeper into the Metroid mythos, and it certainly doesn't detract from the game, seeing as the game features almost no dialogue or cutscenes. I really like the premise of the plot, though. I like how Samus is almost avenging the Galactic Federation comrades, and you get to learn more about Metroids along the way. It's very interesting to get to see firsthand the evolution of these Metroids. The design of the new Metroids is something I love about Metroid 2. I'm a sucker for horrifying different takes on alien life as they mature. Whether that be the Omega Metroid or the cute baby one, I can't get enough of how they look in-game and in the manual. Much like most of the game, the sprite work is fairly well done for an early Game Boy title. You can either play the game entirely in black and white, but subcolor is available for the Game Boy Color. What's a little strange is that on the 3DS Virtual Console, you can only play Metroid 2 in black and white or a monochromatic pattern. I'm not sure why subcolor couldn't have been made available. Besides, the game looks very dated from a visual standpoint. Compared to its sequels, the backgrounds and environments are drab and bland. Sure, it's nice that Samus sticks out for gameplay's sake, but I mean, with a black background, that's the best compliment I can give it. While this design makes it feel like you're traversing the dark atmosphere the game is going for, it does get boring to be staring at the same background the entire time. You can usually tell the distinction between areas with slight texture changes, like on the walls of caves or temples, but there isn't much variety in terms of locale. Enemies like the aforementioned Metroids are well designed though. I like the alien vibe all of these enemies give off. For the system it was on and the time it was released, the developers did all they could, in my opinion. That just means the presentation hasn't aged well, which is made more apparent by the music. Don't get me wrong, I think the music is good from a compositional standpoint. The tracks have nice chords and melodies in theory, but on the Game Boy, with all the compression and weird instrumentation, it doesn't sound too great. Even though the bit crunch gives me flashbacks to playing Link's Awakening as a kid, that doesn't mean I prefer the style of how the music sounds. Specifically, the end of the title theme sounds grating to my ears, which sucks since I can't appreciate how the songs were probably meant to sound. Some songs admittedly don't sound awful though, like the Queen Metroid boss fight theme and the surface of SR388, being among the best in the game. I'm surprised none of these songs were remixed for Super Smash Bros. Or any future Metroid installments. Especially with SR388, it could be so great given that Metroid Prime sound treatment. Another issue with the songs is that most are very short, so when you hear them being looped over and over, it gets on your nerves. Again, I'll chalk this up to the tech the game was released on not being able to give the composer enough room to work with. Still, the presentation has only aged well in concept, not in practice. I can adore the design of the Metroids and some of the musical compositions, but in-game, they leave a lot to be desired. As for the gameplay, much of your time will be spent committing mass genocide of the Metroid species. If you've played a 2D Metroid game, this is the one many take inspiration from in terms of its design and controls. The bulk of the gameplay revolves around being in some confined area, and you, as Samus Aran, have to explore the area and try to exterminate all the Metroid along the way. Much of this exploration is done by taking a path to a new item, then using using the item to go back along to conquer the obstacles you can face with it, thus opening up more and more pathways. Along with that, you can gather resources as you explore, like missile expansions and the such, for challenging boss fights. Rather than making long, straightforward stages like your Marios or your Sonics, Metroid 2 opts for a more exploratory approach to level design. There's a set order for how you grab power-ups and progress, which makes it a bit linear. Though I suppose when it comes to killing Metroids, you have some choice as to when you go after certain nests. Whereas its predecessor was very open-ended and a lot of backtracking for items is mandated, Metroid 2 mitigates this issue by mostly giving the player enough resources to fight bosses and enemies. Sometimes, however, you will have to grind up for resources to take on the tougher foes like Omega Metroids, but compared to the last game, it's a huge step up. Maybe it's just the hardware limitations that cause the game to be slightly less open-ended, but I think it works out well in Metroid 2's favor in the end. The problem is that with a lack of visual variety, many stages become formulaic and you can hardly tell the difference between certain areas. There's not many unique set pieces to distinguish rooms from one another, and that ends up making the game feel more boring. Plus, the level design is pretty standard and never dares to do something entirely different from the usual explore, get item, and go back and explore trope. Levels consist of the same platforming and going from cave to cave to cave again and again. What's the difference between this area and this area? Is there one? You tell me, because this all sort of blends together. This is where so many other better games in the series excel, whether that be the fantastic world building in the Prime Trilogy, or even how iconic Brinstar is in Super Metroid. In this title, there aren't any puzzles, cool level design tricks, or interesting encounters until the end that spice up the gameplay. What makes this even worse is that since the levels and rooms sort of mesh together, this makes it hard to remember where you've actually been. Was I just here? Is this the right place? Well, isn't this the same room I was asking those questions in? Unfortunately, there's no built-in map, which makes exploring and backtracking in Metroid 2 artificially more difficult. You watching, you might know where to go and figure it out, and that's cool, man. Here's your badge for your gaming achievement. But I found it tiresome to have a map by my side, so I never got lost and frustrated. The one thing I actually found surprisingly good were the controls. I expected them to be clunky, but no, comparing them to the NES original, Metroid 2 controls a lot better than before. Now you can shoot downward and yeah, well, it's better than the original controls, so I'll give it that as much. Coming from Super Metroid to this, the inability not to shoot diagonally or morph into the morph ball in midair was jarring. That's the sort of common issue with Metroid 2. It's hard to evaluate it by its own merits when future installments take its formula and innovate on it, making the Metroid formula so much more enjoyable. The return of Samus is a dated experience that doesn't hold up well today when compared to its contemporary Metroid titles. This is why a remake would be a no-brainer, right? Metroid 2 has some good ideas like the evolution of Metroids and the mission objective, but it falls flat on its face in modern times. Another Metroid 2 remake, on the other hand, takes the ideas of Metroid 2 and expounds upon them. Essentially, this is the zero mission version of Metroid 2 with similar controls and updated presentation and level design. AM2R wasn't made out of business purposes. It was made out of a passion for someone who saw that they could remake Metroid 2 into something spectacular. This is immediately made apparent by when you boot up the game and you are met with an actual animated intro cutscene that sort of sets the stage for your main objective: kill all the Metroid. There's a catch though, because now you have the additional objective of trying to uncover what happened to the research team that went to SR388 before Samus. You do this with the new logs that you can find throughout the game, exploring the levels and tracking down Metroids. This adds a new layer of depth previously unseen to Metroid 2, fleshing out the details you might have just breezed past on your first playthrough of the original. I love it when games give you an enormous amount of flavor text to read through if you want. It helps build the world around Samus and gives your objective of killing Metroids again and again some meaning. Such lore contextualizes your actions and allow the player to be more engaged with what's happening around them. Not to mention, reading about the research team and the Metroids causes the situation to be more tense. tense and ominous. The presentation of AM2R also blows Metroid 2 out of the water in every way possible. There's no competition. AM2R takes the areas of the original and reimagines them with a vast array of colors and different sprite work. This is some phenomenal display of pixel art, and how Dr. M64's team transformed the style of Zero Mission for the modern day was genius. Environments pop out and are all visually distinct, making that issue I mentioned before where levels can sort of blend together non-existent. Even when you're in caves and temples, the team made it so that there's special elements to every world. It could be the colors or just simple changes to the walls, like having hanging moss from the ceiling. It makes the world feel connected and varied simultaneously. Given better technical specs, this is how I imagined Metroid 2 looking, and also sounding, considering the soundtrack of AM2R completely reimagines the tracks of the past in the style of Metroid Prime's OST. Tracks like The Surface of SR Theater and Hydro Station are among the best I've heard in a Metroid game. Some are remixes and other are original compositions by Dr. M64's team, and they all sound wonderful. Instrumentation is perfect, and they all encapsulate that Metroid feel. Some reinforce that feeling of tension, while others serve to make boss fights more exhilarating. I love it. You can tell this is from someone who really gets the sound and feel of Metroid. Likewise, the gameplay makes me think that exact thought, that Dr. M64's team took a great deal of time and effort to find out what made Metroid special and how it plays and controls. Taking a page from Zero Mission, you can now shoot diagonally, morph ball in midair, and grab ledges. These expand Samus's already large moveset and make the game more fast-paced as a result, since you don't have to weirdly try to aim at enemies that are in weird spots. Movement and aiming controls are tight and responsive. Plus, if you don't like how it controls, you can always set it up in any way you want in the options menu, which is a great compromise that I think should be an industry standard. Controlling AM2R how I want to control it is a welcome addition, even if the default controls are just fine on keyboard and gamepad. For AM2R, it's all about accessibility and streamlining. It seems the team wanted to improve upon the archaic elements of the past. There's a new map feature where you can clearly see where you've been and where you need to go, as well as counters for how many Metroids you have left to murder. This mitigates the original game's issue of getting lost in a labyrinth of grays, whites, and blacks, as well as making completionist runs less frustrating since you don't have to remember if you killed a certain Metroid in a certain area or not. AM2R doesn't flat out tell you where they are, but rather gives you minimal information about how many are left and lets you do the exploring. Fast travel also exists in AM2R to cut down on backtracking, which is a godsend if you put off finding certain Metroid in areas before and don't want to walk all the way back. While some might argue that this makes the game easier by giving the player unnecessary shortcuts when exploring is the main purpose of Metroid, I think it's fine as long as it's placed in areas you've already been to, like it is in AM2R. This just shortens the boring moments and makes it altogether more convenient. Along with the recharge stations located at save points, AM2R elegantly fuses Metroid 2 with the best elements of the series. This is where the strength of fan projects lies, in my opinion. We all want originality, but sometimes what we delight in is a sense of familiarity. Fans of game series know what makes certain games work well and why they're so special to them, which gives them such an interesting perspective as game designers. Usually these fans will seek to create projects that envision what they feel make what they're a fan of so special. This was done with Sonic Mania almost perfectly, where past stages were remixed in a fan's vision, and original stages were made by studying old ones, picking out the elements that would work best as original ideas. This idea that something that isn't original is inherently bad is something I just can't jive with. Unoriginality usually means that the project doesn't do the unoriginal thing well, and not that it's just original. There's usually more to it, and I think game designers, filmmakers, and what have you can entertain more familiar ideas if they're done in a nuanced and distinct way. AM2R is a similar example of fans recognizing what made the franchise so special and trying to develop a game with that objective in mind. This is what makes AM2R so unique, because it takes all these amazing aspects of the Metroid series and molds it into that perfect vision of why Metroid as a franchise is so entertaining. Not only does Dr. M64's team do this, but they also just generally make Metroid 2 into a better game. They've added new distinct areas and better, more challenging boss fights with an assortment of different attack patterns that you have to learn and triumph over. There are even some original boss fights and boss fights from the Metroid series outside of Return of Samus, to coincide with the ones from Metroid 2 already. I've said it once and I'll say it again, but this is the game Metroid 2 was always meant to be. If I'm honest, I consider this to be one of my favorite 2D Metroid games, even knowing it wasn't professionally made by a company with a budget or anything. It's a fan game, but it's also the best Metroid game we've had for years. AM2R was a game made out of passion and love for Metroid. Dr. M64 had a clear vision and drive to turn Metroid 2 into the masterpiece he knew it could be, and succeeded. This is why I was angry at Nintendo for shutting down the project and insulting his team with unnecessary hostilities and DMCA copyright claims. They never had to protect their IP, but they chose to enforce it to its fullest extent. It makes me sad that Nintendo tried to erase this essential part of Metroid history, causing the game to get less exposure to new people looking to play an actually fun, unique take on Metroid 2 Return of Samus. AM2R could have well coexisted with Nintendo's remake, remaining just a non-profit, passionate fan project, but nope, that's not the Nintendo we know and love. This is why I made this comparison piece, to never forget the game that never was, and how it respected the Metroid franchise with care and love. Rest in copyright violation heaven, AM2R. With that out of the way, why don't we turn our attention to the newest Metroid installment, Nintendo's remake of Metroid 2, aptly titled Metroid Samus Returns. Developed collaboratively by Nintendo and Mercury Steam, who previously worked on the Castlevania Lords of Shadow titles, Samus Returns is the first official Metroid game in a year. Yeah, just less than a year since we got, Federation Force. Still, much like Dr. M64's team, Mercury Steam had been long fans of the Metroid IP, even pitching a remake of Metroid Fusion to Nintendo that allowed them to later work with Nintendo on this remake of Metroid 2. Saying that the people who worked on this game didn't have a similar passion of the Metroid franchise as Dr. M64's crew did would be false, because, like AM2R, it seems like the team was very enthusiastic about remaking Metroid 2, as they saw it could really benefit from a makeover. Though what's kind of odd is that none of the original team behind The Return of Samus seems to be working on the remake. The two original directors, these names, don't seem to be involved with this project at all for some strange reason. The co-creator of Metroid is the producer of this remake, which, is still great, and I think he and the developer team succeeded in making another Metroid 2 remake. Like the original and AM2R, the story follows similar beats, with Samus having to, once again, kill all the Metroids she can by order of the Galactic Federation. This time, rather than having a static opening cutscene like in AM2R, there's a 3D animated one that shows Samus embarking on her mission and landing on the surface of SR-38. There's actually quite a bit of cutscenes that blend in with the gameplay and serve to add moments of tension, like when you first see a Metroid evolve into its alpha form. I like these quite a bit, and since they flow seamlessly in and out of gameplay, it makes it even better. While you can't see Samus's face, you can tell by her body language that seeing these Metroids transform is a bit unsettling and unexpected. The animations are super good too. AM2R might have its strengths in its pixel art, but Samus Returns does a good job at accomplishing this nuanced 3D aesthetic. Environments are well detailed with backgrounds containing a lot of depth to them, creating this atmosphere of exploring an expansive three-dimensional location while being restricted to a 2D space. For being on a 3DS, I think this is the best the developers could have done, and that's not a complaint, that's a huge compliment. This game visually looks fantastic. I like how Samus is modeled, I like the 3D designs of the Metroids and other enemies, and I'm in love with the various locations you can explore. This was one of the only 3DS games I've tried out the 3D for, and to my surprise, it makes the game look exponentially better. Samus pops right out of the environments, and everything looks like it has has just a lot of depth to it. Animations, especially attack animations, all look great.
There's this additional notion that everything on the 3DS just looks terrible. Well, I mean, why develop for the 3DS when there's another better system out there with other better looking games you can develop for, right? I understand this complaint, it's perfectly reasonable, but with the 3DS taking up a huge part of Nintendo's business, I don't see this happening anytime in the future. This comparison between what a Switch game looks like and what a 3DS game looks like is ultimately not fair. You're comparing a 720p or 1080p output to a 240p one. It's obviously going to create a lot of bias because one system can't hold a candle to the other in terms of technical specs. Also put simply, the 3DS lacks anti-aliasing. In short, anti-aliasing creates mid-colors between the foreground and the background to smooth out an image. But on handhelds, like the 3DS, it just makes everything look blurry, so it isn't used to make characters pop out of the background or anything like that. Even when anti-aliasing is used, when you upscale that footage to what you probably have been seeing this entire review and other reviews and other trailers, it makes everything look artificially worse. I stand by my statement that on the 3DS console, not what you're seeing right now or the footage I captured, it looks pretty decent. It isn't bad, you know?
As for the music, I think anything is a step up from the sounds of the original Game Boy title. The composer of this game arranged the original tracks in a brilliant way. The surface of SR388 is as good as ever, and some of the original tunes likewise have some catchy melodies and capture a good, sometimes creepy atmospheric sound. The composer, like with AM2R, really studied the series compositions and managed to incorporate little bits and pieces from the past into these tracks. Samus Returns' soundtrack is some of the best sounding music to ever come out of the franchise, and there are a lot of new instruments included that give off that perfect Metroid feel. In terms of how it plays, Samus Returns is basically the love child of Zero Mission and Metroid 2, like AM2R in a way. You do the same general activity you did in the original. You hunt down Metroids, explore the labyrinthian worlds, collect power-ups and items, and occasionally backtrack to uncover secrets and hidden pathways. This time around, many of Samus's abilities from the previous games have been added, like super missiles and the grapple beam, which further flesh out the level design, making exploration that much more interesting and worthwhile, since expanding your arsenal is one of the most satisfying parts of Samus Returns. However, one of the best new additions to Samus's moveset is this counter-attack, where Samus can melee damage enemies up close. This makes it so that Samus isn't as weak when you get too close to enemies, and it makes sense considering Samus would probably have some sort of close-range attack. However, the issue here is that the counterattack sometimes makes enemies too much of a pushover, since it can be used so often with little to no consequence. Part of the thrill of the past Metroid games was that the lack of a melee attack meant that you never wanted to get up close and personal with enemies, but here it's actively encouraged. Then there are the added AEIOU abilities, like being able to scan areas for hidden pathways and items. This is an ability I could really do without, to be honest. It inherently makes exploring and finding hidden pathways on your own less fun. Where's the fun in just being spoon-fed information about where everything is? The whole entertainment value of exploring comes in finding different special rewards unexpectedly, or by your own intuition, like striking a weirdly shaped nearby wall or seeing something that just looks a little off. Taking this away from players and giving them an easy way out dumbs down the entire experience. Metroid is about the sense of hopelessness and loneliness you might feel in Samus's situation in some strange, alien land with no companions or help. But she overcomes these odds through her own wits, not by some convenient power-up. Not to mention, since you get so many items straight from the get-go, something feels lost as a result. Since you have such a large inventory of missiles, abilities, and the overpowered melee attack, you can plow through enemies with ease. AM2R and even the original artificially made the game more challenging by giving you limited resources and abilities. This was the great fun in it all. You have to plan ahead, you have to be prepared. Metroid isn't an experience that you can just go from point A to point B. And I think Samus Returns misses the point by being so welcoming and rewarding to the player. Not giving the player a sense of direction might be considered risky from a business perspective nowadays, as this isolates some customers, but with anything, it takes time to learn the ropes and overcome obstacles. Taking this away and dumbing down the game to make it more accessible just ruins a lot of the fun of Samus Returns. This is why I tried a self-imposed challenge to not use the counterattack or Aeon abilities as much, because they felt like they just existed as a cop-out like the golden Tanuki suit in Super Mario 3D World, those wings in Yoshi's New Island, or those other wings in Yoshi's Woolly World.
See, the thing with difficulty is that it's entirely subjective. Something you might think is hard, I might think is easy, and vice versa. I personally found Samus Returns easy because of the Aeon abilities, but I also realized that this feature is a completely optional thing you can choose to ignore and not use for the most part. I just mind when these cop-outs exist instead of critically thinking and figuring things out. While not all Aeon abilities are like this, some are like electric shields that can get you through barriers, and they're not all scanning the environment and cheaping your way out of things. I would have liked if they were restricted to like an easy mode, like in Fire Emblem Fates, so that players who are more experienced with Metroid could just ignore these things, and players who weren't could have them at their leisure. I don't mean to come off as an elite gaming guy, I'm sure you all know I suck at a lot of things, but more options would have always been appreciated. It's not something, again, that ruins the game or takes away from my enjoyment of it. Don't get me wrong, it doesn't ruin the game. I don't hate Samus Returns because of Aeon abilities. It's one feature I got over, and that's sort of the thing with all of my problems with Samus Returns. They're small, and I got over them, and I allowed myself to enjoy Samus Returns as its own thing, separate from AM2R, separate from the original Metroid 2.
What's not as controversial of a change is the fact that Samus can aim freely at any angle. This is actually quite a welcome change that makes it a lot easier to kill enemies that doesn't artificially make the game easier since you're not battling with the controls to kill your foes. My only nitpick, and this isn't something that ruins the game or anything, it's something I got over, but I wish that this edition was on a system that had dual analog sticks or something, since aiming could be a lot more precise and streamlined with not having to stop an aim use this stupid nub on the 3DS.
I want to reiterate, I certainly don't think the controls on the 3DS are bad. It's the first Metroid game built for the 3DS, besides the Antichrist. So, you know, I had to get used to it. Distinct and personal preferences don't make something objectively bad. I would have loved to aim in all directions with another analog stick, but I got over it. It wasn't a big deal in the end. These small issues didn't detract from the fact that I enjoyed all of Samus Returns for as long as I played it. I played this game twice. If I didn't like it, I'd probably stop after the first one, you know?
To give credit to the 3DS, however, I think that having the map on the bottom of the screen at all times is such a good design choice. Gone are the days of pausing to look at a map to see where you are. Here are the days where you can simply look down and see everything you want to see. There's nothing wrong with this feature, it's so simple and genius. It makes exploring the areas thoroughly easier because you can clearly see at all times where you're going and where you've been. Despite these good changes, there's one large issue I have with Metroid Samus Returns, and it's the stupid addition of DLC in the form of amiibo. I know, I might have loved these figures in the past, but here's the thing. I never bought them for their features, I only bought them as collectibles. Nowadays, I don't have the money to spend on such amiibo, and I don't have any real desire to anyway. Metroid Samus Returns requires you to own 4 amiibo to get all the content available, MSRP $52 US, which is absurd to me. I don't want to get a bunch of pieces of plastic that are already hard to find, mind you, to unlock extra stuff in any game. This is why the Toys to Life concept just doesn't jive with me. I don't like it. Granted, 3 of the 4 amiibo just give you an extra energy tank and some galleries of art, the soundtrack, and the ability to locate Metroids nearby, and I guess those are fine by themselves, since generally you can find those things online for free. Those aren't such an issue, but what is this cute Metroid amiibo that unlocks hard mode. mode, labeled Fusion Mode. While you can unlock a hard mode by completing the game normally, this hard mode is harder and grants Samus her fusion suit. I don't like that this one mode is locked behind a $13 paywall. I want to play the hardest mode I can in this game because I like it that much, and you're telling me I have to waste more money just to get it? That's absolutely unfair. What might be a better compromise, and I would still kind of be bothered by it, is if this feature wasn't locked behind $13. Maybe if I paid $2 on the eShop for it, that would be, I guess, better? But still, I want my ass to be handed to me on a Metroid-shaped platter, but you let me down, Nintendo. All in all, what is the definitive way to play Metroid 2? Well, honestly, I think my award would have to go to AM2R. It's a hard decision, but in the end, I found myself liking this version just a tad bit more. You might say I'm biased since I seem to have a vendetta against Nintendo for abusing their copyright, but no, I don't. I sincerely think AM2R is my favorite of the three. That's my opinion. The first game is dated as hell, I'm sure we all can agree on that, but AM2R is the definitive edition of Metroid 2 with its added original elements of boss fights, areas, and new and improved controls. Samus Returns might have the better animation and cutscenes, as well as the added perk of a map screen being displayed at all times on the bottom screen, but I liked playing AM2R more. I still love Samus Returns, and I think it's a fine remake though. It's the perfect entry point if you want to get a taste of what Metroid is. It certainly makes Metroid 2 that much more accessible to newer players. Then again, is this comparison even fair? Is it fair to compare a low-budget fan project that took 10 years to make to a high-budget 3DS title developed by professionals that took 2 years to make? Yeah, I think it really is. This distinction between fan and professional projects is meaningless in the end. Time and time again has shown fans can make games just as good, if not better, than the quote-unquote professionals of the industry. And I think Dr. M64's project still holds up today when compared to a team of professionals project. You should play AM2R if you never got the chance. There are ways to acquire the game that never was, if you know where to look. I'm not gonna tell you though. It's a scavenger hunt, and also a very illegal liability. As for Samus Returns, I think you should play that too because overall, it's quite good. For a 3DS game on the go, I think you'll get some enjoyment out of it for its price. Don't wait for that price drop or sale, you'll regret it. It's a good game. There's this additional idea that buying Samus Returns will show Nintendo we still have affection for the Metroid brand. I don't know how true that is, but I hope this game is successful so we get more Metroid games in the future, not having to wait 14 years or so between releases. Imagine this. Federation Force 2. Anyways, I just prefer AM2R myself. Doesn't mean that makes the other options worse. As always, if you're angry at me for saying my opinions, let me know in the comment section below. Do you disagree or agree with me? I'm always willing to have a chat if you're willing to give me the time and not the anger. Thank you so much for watching and take care. Have a wonderful day.
Oh, don't mind me. I just finished up editing, and also you finished up watching this long video. I don't really make long videos because I feel like my voice gets droning and you probably fall asleep. But if you like this kind of stuff, let me know. I'm always open to try new things, and I'll probably do some sort of other long-form analysis in the future that should be pretty fun. So yeah, have yourself